Time has come to talk about PKM, and I could not be more excited. Hopefully, you are as well, Corey.
I am. I am excited to talk about PKM. I'm excited to pick your brain as well about this.
Awesome. Yeah. So, on the topic of PKM, before we get to follow up, I should mention that I spent last week creating a sales page for Life HQ, which is not really a sales page because you can't buy it yet. But hopefully, by the time this goes live, you'll be able to get it within a couple of weeks. And I recorded kind of like a 3 or 4 minute promo video, a bunch of FAQs, detailed what is in this done for you vault. And then there's a 22-minute visual tour if you want to see it all in action. But Life HQ is basically my done for you Obsidian vault, which I am trying to help people use Obsidian in a way that is going to help them be more productive and creative. The goal here is to establish the hub of your PKM stack so that you can do your best creative work. And all the plugins and settings are pre-configured with the goal of saving you some time when you decide to implement something like this. I've written over 50,000 words in terms of how-tos and productivity and creativity curriculum. So like the creativity flywheel is in there, the PKM stack is in there, all the life theme stuff is in there, and kind of how it all ties together. This is my life's work at this point. So if you are interested in this, go check out practicalpkm.com/lifehq, and there's a form where you can put in your email address if it's something that you're interested in, and then I will let you know when it's available. And also, I'm going to have basically a launch discount when it comes out, but people who join that wait list are going to get an additional discount emailed to them on top of it. So that'll be the way to get the lowest price on this thing when it becomes available. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, then check out practicalpkm.com/lifehq. Corey, I know you're beta testing this. Thank you for doing that. I just released it to a bunch of other beta testers today. So I'm really nervous now. Hopefully it does everything that I say it will and think it will, but haven't seen the feedback come back in yet. So
Can I share the text that I sent you with the audience? Right?
Sure.
Like,
I need
do
you to
care?
put this in a testimonial for the website,
Yeah.
by the way.
Okay. I'm reading this text from our messages thread. I'm watching your Life HQ video, and this is insanity. Good insanity. You've created a completely custom application using Obsidian as a backend. It's truly outstanding. If you aren't a premier partner of Obsidian, they are really missing out. And then I went on. But it's like, so if anybody out there is in like Obsidian's leadership team, right? No joke. You need to see this Life HQ thing. And you need to make Mike a premier partner, because what he's doing is crazy to me. Like, we were just talking in the pro show about, like, if we could just tinker around with stuff. And like, this is one of those things. I opened it up and I'm looking at it and I was like, man, I really wish I'd have made something like this. Like, I really wish I would have been able to figure out like how to put all these pieces together and actually make it work and make it make sense. I can't remember the name of it right now because I've since fallen off of it. But there was this other guy's like productivity system that I was running through, and it used Notion as a backend. And I thought the same thing with his, right? So in my mind, like, yours is like the Obsidian version of like magic. It's like, I mean, I know it's not magic, but it's like, it's crazy. So check it out. It's pretty awesome. And keep going, Mike. Keep working on it.
Cool. Well, thank you for the endorsement. The follow-up items that we had here, I can go through mine first and maybe help you feel better about some of yours. All right. So the first one I had was, how can I make the ritual of date night more meaningful? And I've been thinking a little bit about this. However, date night has been hard to come by the last couple of weeks with school starting and soccer. My way around this has been to schedule a trip to Boise that Rachel is going to come with me on. And it's sort of going to be extended date night. But the reason we're going to Boise is that we are going to record a bunch of life theme videos at the ConvertKit studios. So it does have a work purpose. But because of that, we moved this recording up, actually. And there has not been multiple weeks in between the recordings like there are on the release schedule. So I haven't had a chance to actually implement anything with this yet, and therefore I'm going to say I failed at this. The other ones, next one was to figure out my transition to work rituals. I have been thinking about this as well, and I think I've sadly come to the conclusion that I need a commute.
Yep. Yep.
Not a long commute, hopefully, but I am going to start going to the co-working space every morning. And I want to get there early before everybody else does. And I think that commuting time, which is like 15 minutes for me, it's not anything outrageous. That's going to help me transition into work mode. Now, at the end of the day, the shutdown routine, I think obviously if you have a bookend of a commute on one end, then that sort of is part of the shutdown routine as well. But I am trying to, when I shut down for the day at the co-working space, shut down. Obviously on days like this, when I have to record a podcast from home, that's a little bit different. And I don't know exactly how that's going to work out yet. I think I still need like a checklist of items where this is exactly what I'm doing as I'm ending my workday. I don't have that yet. What I've kind of established is I want to do the heavy creative lifting at the beginning of the day. So I have a bunch of writing projects that I want to work on, including another book, by the way. So this book that we're covering today is very timely for me. And I want to work on that stuff in the morning, kind of take a break around lunchtime. That's usually when I'll go for a run, work out, grab lunch. And then the afternoon, I want it to be more just like playtime. So if I'm going to mess around with something, try to figure something out, that's when I would do it, or it would be admin time. And I'm going to go through support emails or whatever in that time. But I still need something that is going to be that signify the end of the workday on my computer, other than get in the car and drive home, because I don't always have to do that. When I have to do that, it's easy, because not only do I put the computer away and then come home, but I have been, when I get home, putting my computer in my office and then not going into my office.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been successful, but there's still more elements to be added to this, I think. So I'll try to figure this out after we're back from Boise, I guess.
Nice. And if that doesn't work, if your commute doesn't work, you could ride your bike around your house 4 times.
Yeah, that's not happening. Sorry.
All right. So my follow-up is what rituals do I want to implement? So I thought about rituals that I wanted to implement in personal life, in family life, and in work life. So in personal life, I think one of the big rituals I want to think. So remember, the difference between rituals and routines is the meaning behind them. So each of these has like a big meaning. I'm not going to share that right now, but like there's a more intentional meaning behind it. But for personal, it's like basically like meditating on scripture and prayer, right? Like I really want to incorporate that ritual into my life. What I'm trying to figure out is when and where do I do that? I get up really, really early already. So like a lot of like places or a lot of people will say like, just do it in the morning. It's like, that doesn't really work for me, because I'm already getting up really, really early and have a thing like as soon as or fairly quickly after I wake up. So I think that actually needs to be later in the day or in the evening. I've debated whether I should do it like during lunch, because it will cause me or like make me stop in like the middle of the day, which I don't normally do that. So I'm thinking about that personal one, and where do I implement it into my day. For family, it's really this idea of like one-on-one time with the members of my family. We do a lot of stuff together as a group, but it's like I want to be more intentional, and I want to develop rituals where there's planned in one-on-one time with the folks in my family. And then from a work standpoint, I've actually gotten to where Mike is in terms of I need a better ramp into the day and a better ramp out of the day. So it's like I do this already. Like I have like my commute I use as kind of a ramp in, ramp out. But like what I'm talking is more formal. And this is why the Life HQ thing is so appealing to me, is like I think I can incorporate that into the day, where essentially before I start my workday, the first thing I touch is the Life HQ system, right? And then the last thing I would touch is the Life HQ system. What I'm trying to figure out is like, okay, well then how do I bring it back in if there's any kind of like journaling in there, or if like, any kind of other personal stuff is, but I'm not sure if that matters, right? Like I could revisit it later in the evening, when I'm doing my planning for the next day as well. And that doesn't mess with my start and finish. But I think like I think it's a good idea for it's like the first thing I do is open up Obsidian and do the 4 steps on whatever I have, and then the last thing I do before I leave work is the Obsidian, and I do the last the 4 steps that I do before I leave the office every day. So I think those are the rituals that I'm thinking about and trying to figure out how to implement. So overall, I would say like as a counter to the way I normally do follow up, I actually think I feel pretty good about this one. We had a short week, and I was actually able to think critically about these, which was awesome. So
Nice. And just to add a little bit of context with, you mentioned using Obsidian specifically in a couple of places. I've done that as well, but I don't use it on my computer in those places. I use it on my phone. But again, like my phone, I have done a lot to curate the types of things that I'm able to do on my phone. So the Obsidian usage on my phone is simply for journaling. I open up my daily note at the beginning of the day, and that's how I see today's Bible readings. I have a whole note that pulls in today's chronological Bible reading and displays it in a colored call out. And then at the end of the day, I'll do all my journaling. I've got a shortcut, which I'll use to log my daily questions. And then I've got journal entries. So I'll jot a couple significant things that happen throughout the day, and then gratitude. Those are the things that are kind of non-negotiable at this point. Whole process takes a couple of minutes. I've got videos on all of that stuff, so I can put those in the show notes if people are interested. These are all YouTube videos. So I've got one for the shortcut itself that I created using shortcuts on my iOS device. And then I've got one on the daily questions journaling format as well. So I'll make sure that those links get in the show notes. But I think that's a cool idea of figuring out what are the apps or tools I'm going to use at a specific time in a specific way. And you got to be clear on what you're hoping to get out of the interactions that you have with your devices in order to actually hit the mark with that stuff. But kudos to you for thinking it through.
Awesome.
All right. Ready to talk about today's book?
I am.
All right. So today's book is A System for Writing by Bob Doto. And this was one that the PKM community was chattering about before Bob released it. And it's a book about zettelkasten. I'm curious, before we get any further, when I say the word zettelkasten, how do you feel about that? Like, what sort of reaction do you have to that?
Yeah, so I was very familiar with zettelkasten as a system, and I've actually even tried to implement it a couple different times before, and it never worked. Like it always fell flat. I'll put the end before, but it's like I still don't love it. Like, I mean, I like the idea of it, and I think I see the value in it, but it's like I still don't love the zettelkasten system. But I was familiar with it, so it wasn't surprising to me when like I read about it. I was like, oh, okay, I got this. I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos on this, and I've seen it before. So
yeah. So some context here. I have also not been a huge fan of this model or this framework, zettelkasten in general, because I probably went through a lot of the same stuff that you did. I read How to Take Smart Notes by Sankey Ahrens, and he kind of is the guy when it comes to this. And he talked about Nicholas Luhmann and the slip box and how he used it to write so many papers and was just this prolific creator. And like, you hear those stories and you're like, that sounds pretty cool. And then you try to implement it and it just never stuck for me either. And it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Now, I admit that I tend to fall into the comparison trap pretty easy. So it's easy for me to look at someone like Nicholas Luhmann and say, well, they're so much beyond me that like this doesn't really apply to me. We're not in the same situation. I think that's a mistake. I think there's definitely some stuff that you can learn from it. But basically, I wrote it off. It's like, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And then I talked to Bob Doto when on the Focus podcast. This was after I had read the book, and the spoiler alert here is that this is the first book about zettelkasten that I think I actually enjoyed. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to stick with me yet. We'll get into the specifics of the method that Bob outlines here in this book in a minute. But I do want to share that this was the first time that I ever really thought, you know what, maybe there is something here for me. And Bob is a really interesting guy. When we talked to him for Focused, we really just talked about zettelkasten in general and kind of how Bob does things. But we tried not to get into the specifics of the book itself. We really just kind of used some of the big themes as jumping off points. So ever since I read this book, I have been wanting to get into the nitty gritty of this with somebody.
Okay, good.
And I remember you bringing up the Focused interview in one of our prior shows and saying that you were interested in reading the book. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe we should cover this then.
I wanted to read this book because I want him to convince me why zettelkasten is great and why I should care about it and why I should actually go through the hassle. I say hassle. Why I should actually go through the work, the effort to start using it. Like, so that was fully transparent, motivated, like, Bob, like, make me want to use this. Make me set up a system where I'm actually trying to do this. And that's what I was looking for coming into this book.
Yeah. And make me care, basically. And that's the subtitle, how an unconventional approach to note making can help you capture ideas, think wildly, and write constantly. That's, in a nutshell, what you're going to get with this book. So you may be listening to this and saying, that's not me. This book probably is not for you then. Although I think I would argue, based on my creativity flywheel framework, that people are more creative than they give themselves credit for. And maybe you are creative, you just don't know it yet. I make the fundamental argument that everybody is creative, even lawyers, accountants, engineers. Just the way that you express your creativity is maybe a little bit different.
Yes.
So I think there's something here for everybody. I'm excited to jump into the content of this book. Before we do, it is a fairly short book. It's a self-published book, I'm pretty sure. So it's it's the way Bob wanted it to be, and he wanted it to be short and actionable. There's lots of visuals in here, lots of examples of notes that he's taken over the years as examples, which I think are really helpful. But it's 166 pages before you get to the afterword. Looks like about 170 pages all together. And it's labeled as a zettelkasten primer. I think that is a very accurate description. And it is broken down into a couple different parts. There's an introduction, which is where we're going to talk just briefly about some terms that he'll use, zettelkasten in general. Then part 1 is taking and making notes. Part 2 is making and leveraging connections. Part 3 is writing with your zettelkasten. And then there is an afterword where he talks about the triangle of creativity, which we could probably do a whole show just talking about that concept. I think that was pretty fascinating anecdote that he dropped in just a couple of pages at the end. Anything else before we dive into this piece by piece?
Yeah, let me kind of double down on the fact that so this was a shorter turnaround for me. So like Mike's already read this book. So for us to do a shorter recording, I had no trouble finishing this book and not feeling like I was rushing through it. Like I was able to actually engage with the book. And it's not just because it was only 170 pages or whatever it was. There's something about the structure of it. There's something about the way it was written that it's like really easy to digest, right? Like I could digest it, I could take notes, and I could think about those notes like in a 6-day period and not feel like, oh my gosh, I'm coming into this recording or I'm coming into this conversation not prepared. No, I feel completely good. So if you're looking for something that's relatively, I say lightweight, but I don't mean it in like not good. Like I don't mean it in a not good way. I mean it in like a really easily digestible way. This might be a good one for you to start out with the idea of zettelkasten.
Well, as someone who has a personal brand called Practical PKM, I'll say in a practical way.
Yeah, yeah. There you go.
That is
Yep.
my goal with the stuff that I do is I want to communicate these concepts in a way that people can actually apply them and start getting the payoff right away. I feel like when it comes to PKM and zettelkasten is part of this too, there's this unrealized promise a lot of times of you're going to have all these connected notes and it's just going to illuminate things and creating is going to be effortless. And then you get discouraged when that's not exactly what happens.
Yep.
And I think it's because people think that when they get everything set up, that somehow magically it's all going to click. And I think the better approach is to take individual pieces of it and ask yourself, what of this can I apply right now to improve my existing workflows? So I think that's a key mindset as we go into this is don't try to just copy everything that Bob's going to outline here. And he would probably tell you the same thing. Think about what pieces of this would actually benefit the way that you're currently doing things and then implement that. But I don't know, maybe there's a possibility where you read this and you're just like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I'm just going to copy paste the whole thing. But I don't think that's the intended approach.
Yeah, Mike, if we don't make it back to it naturally, when we get to the end, make sure I talk about the fact that I like tried to start doing this with some different things and like what the experience was going through that, because I think that'll be a good like conversation about like, oh, I tried to implement this and here are the things that I struggled with and here are the things that went really well and went really easily. So I think we'll get there naturally, but if we don't, like that should be something I talk about, towards the very end.
Okay, cool. All right, let's get into the introduction. And this is a little bit of Bob's story, which I can sort of relate to. He mentions that he did a lot of writing, but didn't consider himself a writer. I had trouble thinking of myself as a creator, even though for many years now I have been creating consistently. Like when I was back with Asian Efficiency, I was in charge of the productivity show. So I was coming out with a podcast episode every single week. I was usually writing a blog post. I was doing screencasts online on the side. I was creating a new video course every month for the membership community. And yet I didn't think of myself as a creator.
Yep.
That's kind of where the creativity flywheel concept came from is once I realized that actually I am creating quite a bit. How is that happening? And then I realized that there's a system there. And that's what Bob talks about, that he started writing when he realized that he had a system. Now, his system is based on the concept of zettelkasten, which I kind of mentioned Nicholas Lumens earlier. He's the one who made this famous. The word zettelkasten literally means slip box in German. It's basically like one of those wooden file drawers that you would see in the old card catalogs, and then a bunch of 3x5 index cards that he would reorder and jot down little notes. This one connects to this one. And he would do that as a way of organizing his thoughts. And then when he would sit down to write, it was easy. So Bob talks about how zettelkasten is an object as well as a method, and that writing is controlled chaos, which I like that description a lot. There's actually a whole section later on, I think, that we'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, Bob's writing systems, there's a visual for this, which I think is really cool. And I'm going to try to describe this for people who are listening. There is the fleeting notes and the reference notes that he captures. And then he takes those and creates main notes out of those. Now, just in those two, there is a cycle or a loop. And that's important because you're constantly collecting information and then you're constantly doing something with it, answering the question, what if this is important? What do I think about this? Okay, and then from those main notes, you create connections. There's another loop. From those connections, you have these high-level views. that's another loop. And then the last loop is with the actual act of writing, where you are creating, in Bob's case, a book, or could be a magazine article, could be anything that you are going to publish and share with the world. So I like the idea of these feedback loops. I like the idea of these feedback loops being connected. I think maybe you could figure out for yourself what the stages of those loops really are. But what is your impression of Bob's writing systems?
Yeah. Okay. So the explanation of zettelkasten made sense. I've heard that a couple different times before. I think it was in the introduction. I didn't actually write it down, but I think it was in the introduction. Everybody touts how much Luhmann wrote, right? Like how many like books he wrote and articles and all this stuff. But then I think Doto throws in this quote in there, but basically Luhmann's like, well, if I could wake up at like 4 a.m. and write until lunch and then take a walk and eat some food and then write until 11 o'clock at night, that's what I do. And I'm like, well, okay. So it's not just the zettelkasten system. Like Luhmann was like solely laser focused on writing. So
Yeah.
I loved that Doto put this in here because it was like, it shined a little more light onto the fact that like it's not this magical system that allowed this guy to write. This probably helped him, but I think there was a lot of honesty in the fact that the system helped him, but he also was just like a very proficient writer. Like he just wanted to write all the time. So one, I really like that idea.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that too. Don't let me forget to come back to Nicholas Luhmann and his prolific output later on.
Okay. So then two, we get into I think and he starts it here. This is the best explanation of the types of notes and why you would use the different types of notes that I've ever, like in all the videos I've watched and everything I've read about it. I think it's the best explanation because I understand that there is a fleeting note and it has a purpose. And it connects to a main note in the following way. And then there's a reference note that has a purpose, and it connects to fleeting notes and main notes in the following way. And then we get to hub notes, and we get to structured notes, and we get to all these different things. And they aren't just like, oh, here's the slip box, and I just throw something on a piece of paper or a digital file and just throw it in there. It's like, no, this is a thing. Put it in the right place and then use it in the right way because that matters, like because there is a system to how these things all connect and tie together. And when you were describing the loops, he does it here. And then when you go back and revisit the loops, you see it even more clearly. It's like, oh, I understand why there's this loop around fleeting and reference notes and the main notes. And like, I'm going to take these fleeting ideas. Some of them will get used into a main note. Some of them will go into the sleeper folder and they're just going to go away. And that's fine. Like, okay, cool. Like I had it. I thought it was a good idea. And then it just went away and it's fine. And like, this was the clearest high level. This is how you could interweave these things together and like be productive with this, not just make this slipbox system and then magically use it to do cool things. It was like, no, like here's a way that you can actually do this. So you can hear it in my voice probably as I'm talking about it. Like I loved this chapter. Like I loved the introduction because it actually made sense as opposed to just using the word zettelkasten and trying to like impress me with the fact that you're using the word zettelkasten.
Yeah, exactly. That is kind of the impression you get from the people who talk about it. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned a couple different terms here. Let's just define these real quickly because Bob does in this section. So fleeting notes are things that you jot down. Reference notes are things that you're referencing when writing, like a literature note. I think this is book notes for me primarily.
Yep.
Main notes are permanent notes, kind of notes on topics, I would say. Note taking is capturing information.
Mm-hmm.
And then note making is distilling and contextualizing information. This is an important distinction. I first heard about note making from Nick Milo, but I like the visual here of note taking is the information that comes in, note making is the information that goes out, and that synthesis that ties into this whole concept, which I don't know who came up with this originally. It's been around for a long time, of the things get broader and then they get narrower. So divergence, and then at some point, okay, now I have enough information, I'm going to do something with it, and then convergence into an actual deliverable. So
Yep.
note taking is kind of the divergence. I'm collecting everything that resonates. And then the note making, that's the convergence. Now, what do I actually think about this? And then he mentions a train of thought, which is simply just a thread of connected ideas or notes. And those are probably going to come up a lot in the rest of the discussion. So I want to make sure we talk about those. Anything though else from this introduction?
Yeah, like just this distinction here helped me figure out the place for different things in my life, right? So, okay, I read a book and I take notes on that book. Well, I also make notes while I'm reading that book. Well, all of those things can go into that reference note, right? Like in the reference note, the key about it is it's linked back to the book. All of this came from me reading this book. Well, where this became really valuable to me was I'll listen to podcasts and I'm not only like taking ideas from the podcast, like from what the people are saying, but I'm also like more putting ideas together and like thinking new things. And it happens to me more with podcasts than it does with books. But like I now have an idea of like what to do with those. Like, oh, okay, this idea, I'm still going to put it in the reference section associated with this podcast. Or if it's important enough for me to make it a main note, I'm going to reference that podcast. Like this came from me listening to, blah, blah, blah podcast about whatever. But it's like I now have an idea of like where those things go. And it doesn't just go into some random file somewhere that I'm never going to see again or that I'm worried that I'm never going to see again. And like that was huge for me. Like that was really, really big for me because it's like everything has a place. And even if you never see it again, it went to the place it was supposed to go to. And like that was almost freeing. Like as crazy as it sounds, it was like almost freeing. It was like it doesn't just go into the ether of digital space. It goes into its place in the chaos, and we might find it again. Like we might find it again when we need to if we do things right. So I was a big fan of this chapter. I thought it set the stage really, really well.
Nice. Yeah, you mentioned we might find these things again in the future. I think that is important, that little phrase that you mentioned there, because I think some people go into the idea of zettelkasten and creating these PKM systems, and they think that this is going to allow them to instantly recall a specific place where they stored something. That's the wrong approach.
Mm-hmm.
You want to kind of stumble upon these things organically again in the future when they are in the right context. That's where the connections can actually help you. So let's go into part 1 on taking and making notes. Now, there's a couple of chapters that are in this particular section, and they're sort of related to different types of notes. So the first chapter is capturing your thoughts. The second one is taking notes while reading. And then the third one is making main notes. The main notes one obviously talks about main notes. Notes while reading, that's talking about really the reference notes. And then capturing your thoughts, those are the fleeting notes. So rather than take this chapter by chapter, let's talk about the main ideas here. I think there's probably going to be a little bit of overlap. Now, the capturing your thoughts, this is probably something that everyone listening to this is familiar with. I think probably the place that it's most often attributed is like Getting Things Done with David Allen, where it's on the paper, off the mind. So you need to capture the things that have your attention. I didn't really realize until years later that I actually think that that's bad advice to just capture everything that might be important. And I know that's not really there's a spirit behind what he's saying. That's not the literal translation of what he's saying there. But I think I've fallen into that trap when it comes to PKM. PKM, by the way, personal knowledge management, if you're not familiar with that term. But really, I believe that information is, from Tiago Forte, information is the fundamental building block of everything that you do. So information is constantly coming into your world, and then you are constantly doing something with that information. And we're kind of at a point in history where there's too much information to try to keep up with it all. So you have to decide for yourself what information is actually worth paying attention to. Now, that translates into capturing, because when you capture things, these are things that, based on Bob's system for writing here, are going to be useful in the future, or at least you think they are going to be useful in the future. And hopefully you can understand how that might be very different than could this possibly be important in the future? Those are different things. And so I like to think of the capture phase as I am looking for cool mental Lego pieces that I can add to my collection that I might be able to use to create something new in the future. So when I am looking for those cool pieces, what I'm looking for is something that resonates. And I like that term resonate because I grew up playing violin. It's an acoustic instrument, and it literally, that's how it makes sound, is it resonates. You can feel it. So it like reverberates. That's the picture I get, is there's a reverberation that goes off in your soul when you come across something that feels like it might be important. So those are the things that I would capture as fleeting notes. Fleeting notes are, by definition, impermanent. They will be deleted before you move them into a permanent note. And so this kind of hits on something which I have thought has been missing for a long time in the discussion of zettelkasten and PKM, where a lot of times people are looking for the most frictionless way to capture things into Obsidian, for example. And there's not a great way to do it. That's actually a good thing, because if all you did was capture stuff in there, you would end up with a lot of noise and not a lot of signal. So I actually believe that having some intentional friction between the capture and the curate phase of the creativity flywheel for me. But basically, I'll capture things in drafts whenever, oh, this sounds like it might be important. And then later on, I will transfer those things into Obsidian. And I would say probably 90% of the stuff that I captured as fleeting notes doesn't make the cut. And I just trust that if it's really important, it's going to come back later, but I just delete it. And so I think that the way Bob describes this is much more in line with the system that I kind of stumbled upon, where you capture these fleeting notes into an inbox, and then later on you decide if it's not useful, you trash it. If it is useful down the road, he introduces the concept of a sleeping folder, which I think you kind of hit on earlier. If it's useful now, then maybe we'll bring that over into a main note that gets stored in the zettelkasten, and that contributes to the writing. What do you do in terms of the capture phase?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this. I didn't have a good system prior to this, right? So I'm looking at your Life HQ thing, right? And you have the workflow in there where you show like how the different apps are used in different ways. So I had that like kind of in the back of my mind priming this. And then I'm thinking about him talking about these fleeting notes. And when you think about the fleeting note, as you said, it's impermanent, right? And I don't know if I'd go that far, because I think it could be permanently in your sleeping folder until it depends on how good you are at going back in and like, filtering out that sleeping folder. But it's like, even if it's permanently in your sleeping folder, it's impermanent as a fleeting note. It's either going to get turned into a main note, or it's going to move into your sleeping folder, which is in my mind, a different bucket.
Yep.
That's good, because then I think about it as, okay, put the stuff in there. And where this will fall down for me, I can tell you right now, is the curation phase. Do I take the time to go through and actually curate those fleeting notes and make myself move them one place or another? I either make this go to a main note, or I make this go into the sleeping folder, and I'm not allowed to leave it as a fleeting note in the inbox. Now, you asked the question specifically, like, what would I use to do that? I think what I've landed on is there's going to be two things. There's going to be my phone in drafts. I'm going to use drafts because it's just so easy and fast to get information into drafts. And then the other one is I'm going to have a note card and a pen with me at all times. And the reason why is because I'll be in certain social settings, or I'll be in certain situations where I just don't want to pull out my phone because I'm afraid I'm going to get distracted, or because it's just not the right context. But for me to jot something down on a note card, again, this is where this will fall down. The fleeting note process will fall down for me is, do I remember to go through the note card and the drafts essentially daily? Or, in my mind, if I'm not doing it every other day, I got a problem. Like I've taken too long to do that. And then I'm going to go convert those in. So I think that's where I'm going to really try to focus on in the next, call it an action item, right? I'm really going to play around with this process of, for the next week or two, how good am I at capturing the fleeting notes and then processing the fleeting notes? And that's really the only thing I want to do. Like, I don't care if they turn into great main notes. I don't care if they all go into the sleeper folder. am I capturing well and am I processing well? And that's my metric for success for implementing these things.
Nice. Yeah, and just to reiterate there, you mentioned the processing and putting that either into a sleeping folder or a main note. I think that there's another option there, which is you just get rid of it. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
the one of the things that I think that is important for this to stick, definitely for me, maybe for some other people, is that there isn't a set time or day. Like I don't feel pressure where I have to go through and process this. If things just sit in the drafts inbox for 2 weeks, that is effectively like me deleting those ideas. And I'm okay with
Okay.
that. Right. So it's not a email inbox where I have to check this every day because there might be something important in there. The thing that makes this work for me is this is an additional step. And whenever I get around to it, that's fine. And until I do process those things, it's almost like those things don't exist. Sometimes I'll go through my drafts inbox and I'll capture a couple of things. I'll have forgotten that I captured something and I'll capture it again in a different way. And oh well, like that just adds more weight to the argument that this should actually be transferred over by the time I go look at it. So the exception to this, I think, is the reference notes. So maybe we should go there next.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the reference notes, and the whole chapter is talking about taking notes while reading. It doesn't have to necessarily be books, but that is obviously the context I have in mind as I go into this. And the reason for that, I think, is that the way that I take notes on my books, that they function very much as the reference notes. Although an argument could be made that this could be articles, blog posts, stuff like that. For me, the reason that this is always book notes kind of stems from How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. And in there, he talks about the whole process for working a book. I've adapted that into a bit of a modern version, which is why I use the mind node, and I create the mind maps. Like that's my version of working the book like Mortimer Adler talks about. What I don't want, just me personally, is highlights automatically being piped in. Again, I want intentional friction between, okay, now I've read the book and I've taken the notes. Now I'm going to transfer those over into Obsidian from MindNode. And the way that I do this is I have the mind map file I export as a PDF. I also, because MindNode is great, you can export it as Markdown. So I'll copy and paste that Markdown. Those now are fundamental building blocks that I can break apart into their own separate notes. And I don't actually do that a ton. I do it occasionally when I think something is a big enough idea that it can stand on its own. I'll break it into an atomic note. Again, I've got YouTube videos for all this stuff. I'll put some links, I guess, in the show notes. But the idea here is that these are things that you're going to go back and refer to, and these are notes that you take when you are actively engaged with the media. So that media could be a lot of different things. It could be YouTube videos. It could be podcast episodes. For me, I have firmly compartmentalized this as books, and I'm curious to hear how you think you're going to apply these reference notes. But I do want to just call out real quickly the 6 things to consider when reading. So read with a question or problem in mind. I think these are great, by the way, and these can apply beyond just the book format. But read with a question or problem in mind. I think just to stop on this one a little bit, one of the things that helped me establish a reading habit was picking books that I thought were going to solve a problem that I was experiencing or a pain point that I was trying to resolve. So that's when you have a specific thing that you're hoping to get out of the material, that changes how you interact with it. So that's great. Capture ideas you disagree with. I do this. In fact, in the one that I shared with my most recent newsletter, I shared a mind map from 168 Hours by Laura Vanderkam. And there is a note in there. I realized when I shared it there's an argument that she makes on one specific piece of it. The book itself is pretty good, and I like the way that it encourages you to think about designing the life that you want to live. But there was one point I saw, my note was, I call BS.
Yeah. Yep. For sure.
So like that forces you to decide what you're going to do with the information that you're reading. And it's not just a guru coming down from the mountain with the stone tablets. Capture what you think about what the author thinks. Capture someone else's interpretation. Don't forget fiction. Okay, Bob, I won't forget fiction. Thanks for the reminder.
I thought of you, so that's so funny you bring it up because I thought of you. I was like, yeah, Bob, get Mike. Go get Mike.
Yep. I don't have a great workflow for capturing from fiction yet, but and then go wild with your captures. I think this is important, like with a caveat. So go wild with your captures, capture everything that resonates, but don't try to recapture the entire structure of the book. I talk about this in the reading masterclass workshop that I did a while back. This is a mistake I think people make when it comes to nonfiction books specifically, because they're typically written as a definitive source on whatever topic. And if you just try to capture everything that the other person is saying is important, you'll end up recreating the whole structure of the book. So you want to you want to capture the key arguments that they're making, not all the details, not all the lists. You want to understand their arguments and then decide for yourself if those are actually good arguments. So those are the 6 things to consider when reading, but I would say maybe applies to just about every other medium out there. How are you going to use reference notes?
Yeah, see, so I differ from you a little bit in terms of, you say you don't want your highlights to be automatically piped into Obsidian. You want there to be friction there. I want there to be friction at the next layer. Now, this is where something he says in the introduction that we didn't talk about ties into this. There is a big difference between my automatic pipe in from the book and then what should go into the reference note in the zettelkasten. And I had never thought about this before, and I'd never done this before, but I like the idea of taking those automatically piped in highlights, because my brain, when I read, I engage way more if I'm like highlighting and noting and doing different things. Well, then I want those all to be put into a summary file. So I'm going to call that a summary file. Well, then the summary file gets transformed into the reference note that goes into the zettelkasten. And that's where the friction happens. And it's going to take me 20 minutes to an hour, depending on how long the book is and how much I captured. I'm going to get rid of stuff. I'm going to add things in. I'm going to add comments in. I'm going to restructure things in, oh, well, he said this in chapter 4, but I think this ties to the point in chapter 1 better. So I'm going to take that note and re-engage it up there. I also don't have a problem with grabbing more information than it sounds like you would want, somebody to grab, or that you personally grab. So it's fun to hear the differences in the way we capture things out of a book. Because like I essentially want to go back to this note file, whether it's the summary note or the reference note. Like I would have said the summary note before. Now I would say the reference note. I want to be able to go back to that reference note, be able to skim that reference note and immediately know what the author's arguments were and immediately know my stance on the author's arguments. Right? Like, and if I can do that, immediately is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? In a very short period of time, I can know the author's arguments and my stance on those arguments, at least at the time of me processing that reference note. Like, that's really valuable for me. So like, if I can have that, and that is my reference note going into the zettelkasten system, man, that's huge for me. And that's way better than what I currently have or what I've had up until now. That is a really important thing. And Mike and I were talking kind of before everything got officially going. I'm not sure where mind maps sit for me in this, because like mind maps have been good and I like mind maps, but I don't think I use them in the same way Mike uses them as a true mind map. I think I use them more as a visual outline, right? And I don't think that's the nature of them, or that's the intention of them. So like, I want this reference note, and maybe the reference note is the thing that is gonna seal it for me. I hope it is.
Well, I don't think I don't think I have issue with the way that you're describing using reference notes. So just to clarify, my issue with the automatic import of the highlights is when you import the highlights from your notes. Let's say you read deep work or something, and you have all these highlights that get automatically synced via Readwise into your Obsidian Vault because there is a plugin that does that. And then you never go through and process those highlights. Okay, so that is the issue I have, is like you highlight them once and then you think they're going to come up again. No, you've got to have some distillation of those ideas still. And if you're going through and you're working those and you're adding more and you're creating summaries, then you are doing the additional work that's necessary to glean the value from those highlights. But I also, for some reason, have never really liked Tiago Forte's what does he call it? Progressive summarization. He's got like 4 different levels that he goes through. So essentially, you would highlight the digital highlights. Those would get piped over from the actual text itself. And then from there, he would italicize certain things, then he would bold certain things. And you basically force yourself to go through it multiple times until you get down to the core essence. That's always felt like too much work for me as well. So I feel like the emoji system that I use when I'm taking notes, bringing those over, and then so I'll do that once basically as I'm taking the notes in MindNote, and then bring them over in Markdown. But I also will add a 3-sentence summary at the top of the book. So that's kind of my abridged version of the progressive summarization. And that is a helpful thing, distilling it down into just a couple of sentences based off of all of these things that you have read. But I think like that's important. But then how deep you go down that rabbit hole is probably a matter of personal preference.
Well, and I would say that just in our conversation right now, there's at least 3 different ways to do this friction step. Right, like which is good. There's guaranteed other ways to do it. Like, people. There's probably as many ways to do this friction step as there are people, out there. Do the friction step. I think that's the key thing, is like do the friction step, because that's where things get really, really valuable. Like I think taking that reference note and then making the main notes out of it, which is where we're going. Like we're going to transition into main notes now. That's the friction step on top of the friction step that now really makes it meaningful. And it's different than progressive summarization, because now I'm not, like the way he describes writing the main notes, it's not just taking the highlight and transferring it over and calling it a main note. Like you're actually going to reformulate that into an idea, into an idea that we're going to link with these other ideas. So sorry if I jumped the gun, but I think it'd be a good time to transition to main notes.
I agree. So that is ultimately what you want to do, is everything in the reference notes is kind of priming the pump for making the main notes, is the argument I would make. Now, the main notes themselves, what the heck is a main note? I guess when I went into this, I was thinking of a main note as kind of like a map of content is the popular term. I don't really use that specific term. Like with Life HQ, basically what I have defined it as is maps. I've got a whole section of maps. But those maps are really on specific topics. Like I have a map on task management, a map on time management, a map on life theme, map on the creativity flywheel. And I think what he's talking about with main notes is something that is more granular than that.
So I didn't get that main notes were the maps of content at all. Like what I got is main notes were what you would call atomic notes.
Yep.
And then hub notes would be maps of content, or structured notes would be maps of content. And I'm still processing which one I think is more like a map of content. And I think it's my lack of knowledge on maps of content more than structured and hub notes. But like, am I interpreting it differently than you are?
No, you are correct. Yeah. So that's
Okay.
what I was thinking going into it, is, that's what the main notes are going to be.
Okay.
But I think they are they are something different. Now, a main note should have 2 components, Bob argues, and I think I agree with this. A single idea and a link to another idea stored in your zettelkasten. I think the single idea part has been something I've been practicing for a while. That's the whole idea of the atomic notes. And just a little bit of background on the idea of atomic notes, by the way. So as far as I know, I came up with this because I was struggling with Obsidian coming from Rome Research because I wanted to create a cross-reference library of all my Bible study sketch notes. And in Rome, it was no big deal because you had like the book note and then the chapter note and then the verse, but there weren't concepts of notes. They were just additional levels of bullets that you could drill down in. And then when I came to Obsidian, I was like, how do I do that? And everyone's like, oh, just link to the blocks. But it adds these like ugly code blocks at the end of it. And I'm like, no, that looks stupid. Plus, it's not showing up that way in the local graph. Like that's what I want to be able to navigate between those. So I quickly came to the idea of, well, I've got to break all this apart into the individual verse notes. And then the thing that made it click was thinking about how James Clear describes atomic habits as like the smallest component piece, but also something being very powerful. I'm like, oh, so if I could break this down into the smallest component pieces, but those connections, because I had that workflow of the cross-reference library in my head, like that would be so powerful if I could just look at the notes that I took, see, these are the verses that were mentioned, click on one of those verses and see all the other notes that I took that reference that specific verse. That would be really cool. So that's what I built with the help of Joe, who ran the script for me that broke apart the King James version into the individual things. And then I actually created a video for the Suite Setup course on Obsidian about atomic notes. Okay. So that was a couple of years ago at this point. Maybe somebody else came up with that idea before, but it was organic, at least in my my thought process with this. So then the piece that was missing though was that link to another idea that's stored in your zettelkasten. And that I am still kind of chewing on. I think that's really powerful and I want to start doing that more, but I also don't have a formal process for that. Now that is where zettelkasten comes in, and I don't think I want to implement pure zettelkasten.
Okay.
But one of the things that I'm going to start doing, I guess there's an action item here, is that when I create a note, I want to start thinking about what other things should be linked to this. And I've sort of done this in Life HQ because in all of those how-tos, I realized that, like, for example, I have a how-to on here's how you add tasks using the quick add macro that I created. But then what are the other related notes that someone is going to want to see that tie to that? And it wasn't as simple as just looking at, well, what are the other things that I link to in the text of the note? So I actually created at the bottom of those notes, see also, and then added the links manually so that people could look at the local graph and be like, oh, these are the other topics that relate to this. And I need to start doing that with the ideas that I'm developing in my own notes vault inside of the Obsidian that I personally use each and every day. But I don't want to have a formula for this. I just want to ask myself that question when I create the notes. Like, what else do I have here that's relevant, that should be connected?
Yeah. So I said about having me talk about trying this. The links to the other ideas, the links to the other main notes was probably the hardest thing. And it's like the most valuable and most challenging thing to do. Cause it's like, how many links do I make? There is no right amount. Well, what's an important enough link to make? I don't know. Like I'm trying to figure out like where do the links sit? And then this will get to an idea that he talks about later, but basically zettelkasten is a non-hierarchical system. So therefore it's not like this note comes before this other note, but my brain doesn't like that. My brain wants to say like, oh, well, this idea sits before this other idea. And this is where we haven't gotten into this, but like one of the additional or extra things he says you can put in a main note is like an alphanumeric ID. Right. So, and he's got this whole process for it, like 1.1, 1.1b, A2, 7, 14. Like my thing is I can't figure out how I want to wrestle around with that. Like, so I'm going to pause on that because we can talk about that later. That doesn't naturally make sense to me. The thing that does make sense to me though is the connection between the notes. And I've mentioned this to you before. I know I have. When I was writing my dissertation, I used VoodooPad. So VoodooPad was this old school Mac application that basically let you create your own personal wiki. So it's like I would have essentially hub pages that would outline an idea, or a structured note that would outline an idea, and then I would link to all the other ideas, and then when I got to that page it would have a link to the page, ideas that came off of that. Because what I was doing, and he phrases it the way that I would have never thought to phrase it, I was making trains of thought. Because when I was writing this long form document or this research paper or whatever it was, trains of thought were how you got from one place to another. It's how you got from one idea to another. It's how you wrote your literature review. It's how you wrote your discussion and connected it back in implications. And it's like, this is a more structured way to develop trains of thought by taking these main notes and linking them. And this is where I think, Mike, are your linkages perfect? Are your see alsos perfect? No. And I don't think that's the point. It's a living system. It can always be updated. It can always be modified. And you're also going to see different linkages depending on the context of when you're looking at it. So you might look at it now and like the 4 things on playing the violin are popping into your head. Oh, well, I've got these notes on playing the violin. You look at it 6 months from now and you could care less about playing the violin, but you're thinking about tacos. And it's like, oh, well, this links to tacos in the following way. And I know I'm being I'm using ridiculous examples, but the point is still there. The context of when you're looking at it matters, and the system allows you to kind of adapt to that context. So I think that's really good. The one I struggle with, or the one I'm struggling to implement, is the previous. So is it really important that I say where I came from to get to this note? Is the two-way communication important? Let me back up. So Bob, he'll do previous, and he'll show you how he got to that note, and then he'll also say see, and he'll link to the notes that he can go from this note, or go to from this note. And I don't know if I see the necessary distinction between those two. I think you could just do C, and say oh, well, here it is. I could be wrong, as I work with this and as I try to develop this, but I think not doing previous and then C would help my brain not try to make these in a hierarchy. It would just really let these natural, non-hierarchical connections actually develop. And I'm trying to wrestle around with how I want to do that. So I know I just talked a lot about about all this stuff, but it's you can see I'm wrestling around with these main notes and how do I connect these main notes a lot, which is a good thing, right? I'm really engaging with zettelkasten in a way that I've never even thought of before. And that's encouraging to me. I have some stuff to figure out, and I don't know how I'm going to figure it out, but I think that's good. I like that.
Yeah. So let's put an official distinction here. We're moving into the next section, because this is getting into making and leveraging connections. These are going to be made from the main notes, to your point, but that's actually where he describes the previous versus C references. And I want to just kind of double click on one other thing here when it comes to making these notes and the connections between them. He talks about developing notes in light of and in spite of other notes, which I think is interesting, because one of the things that can happen when you start building a collection of notes is you want everything in there to be accurate and up to date. But he talks about how there's no need to overhaul a note just because you capture a new one that disagrees with it. So that's important. You can look at these from different angles, different contexts, and I think it's okay to have something in there that's well, that's what I thought at the time when I captured that. Now, when you make the connections, I think I agree with you where the previous versus C references, those make sense if you're going to be looking at this in terms of the zettelkasten and using the ID numbers, and that's not something I want to do.
Okay.
So maybe that is another level of insight that you can get from these notes, and an argument should be made, oh, you should really try this, but that's just not interesting to me. But the connections are. And then also I want to back up a little bit, because you asked me with the main notes, are these the maps of content? Are these the atomic notes? And I think the answer is actually yes, because the way that you would be coming into this, it could be either one of those. You could be making a main note about something that you don't have anything currently. like habits, for example. And as you are talking about habits, that's a single topic. That is a main note, but it's also a map. Once you start adding more in there and you realize, oh, actually, there's this whole section here. This is a separate note that I can break apart as its own atomic note. And that's one of the things I like about Obsidian is that you can actually just highlight that text and you can use the built-in note composer. You can extract that as a new note and it adds the link to the original place so that you can create these connections really easily. Now, is that a previous connection? Is that a C connection? It doesn't really matter in that context. There's no specific direction associated with that. And that's kind of the thing that has made these connected notes work for me is those bidirectional links. There isn't a hierarchy. I think I see some value in like adding that sort of breadcrumb type stuff, but that's not the way that I have used it. So I don't think that that's something that's really going to be valuable for me. But then the other thing that you were kind of hitting on was how do I determine the direction? I kind of think you don't have to know.
Yeah.
In fact, in chapter 4, where he's talking about connecting your ideas, he mentions that as you add more notes, the ways in which they relate will become clearer. So as you start doing this, I think you really aren't going to know. And it's sort of like tagging where you maybe don't want to even get started with it because you don't want to make a mistake and have to fix it later. Or maybe that's just me. I don't know. But that's one of the resistances I've had to tagging things is like, well, if I have to go back and change these tags, like I've made that mistake before and that's so much work. And so you just decide you're not going to do it. I think that's a mistake. And I think the perfectionist in me is always going to want things to be perfect, but Bob's whole description of the chaos is kind of freeing in that it's never going to be perfect. It's not going to be all neat and buttoned up. And that's actually where the magic is going to happen.
Yeah. So let me clarify something. You talked about habits. So you wouldn't make a main note that says habits because the way he describes main notes and the way you make main notes is essentially it's like making action items, right? Or to-dos. You're better off writing them in a way that's like proactive. So habits are essential for project management, right? Like you would write that. You wouldn't just write like habits and project management. Like that would be a bad title. You would write habits are essential for project management. Like that would be your main note. But like if you're going to link or if you're going to try to connect all your habits notes, you're going to make a hub note that's called habits. And in that one, you can just randomly call it habits. And then here are all the notes I have on habits. But that's not a main note. That's a hub note.
Yeah.
Right?
So you're right. But I also think that there's a situation where you're creating a hub note and you don't know that it's a hub note at the time.
Yeah. Okay.
So like just talking about journaling as an example, when I first started journaling, that main note on journaling was probably just a couple of sentences long. Like those were all my thoughts on journaling. But then I got into, oh, well, gratitude, that's a whole separate thing. And daily questions, that's a whole separate thing. Each one of those is their own note, and each one of those actually could be a hub note. So
Yeah.
I think that trying to decide ahead of time, is this a hub note? Is this a main note? Maybe adds additional complexity. The thing that should trigger making either of those types of notes with the intention, I think, of figuring out what do I actually think about this is feeling the mental squeeze point. Like I've collected information on this and I don't really know what I think about it. So I'm going to force myself to codify it through this opinion note. That opinion note could be a main note. It could be a hub note. But the thing that is important there is that I am writing down what I think about it. There's a saying, thoughts disentangle themselves through lips and pencil tips. I would argue also clicky keyboards.
Yeah.
But how long that note becomes, it's anybody's guess. It's just, I know I need to clarify these things. So I'm going to create a new note and I'm just going to start typing and see what comes out.
Okay, so then we get to the IDs, and you said about you're not interested in using the IDs. My gut reaction is I'm the same way. Like I don't like the idea of the IDs at the top. The value of those, he makes this point that like the longer the ID, the longer the train of thought or the more connections that you would have between those. Now, one of the things I hope and I think will be true is Obsidian, if you're using it for your zettelkasten, for a digital zettelkasten, you'll be able to see that anyhow. Like you'll see long trains of thought through the graph view, or you'll be able to see a lot of different connections off of that note in the graph view. Am I correct in that, Obsidian guy?
Yes. Okay. So, what he's after with the zettelkasten here, the the naming structure for the numeric IDs, I get what he's after, and I feel like if you were just going to use a collection of plain text files, kind of like NVAlt or NVUltra back in the day, um, then this is great advice. If this is the only way that you have to figure out how to tie these things together, but this isn't the only way that you have to tie things together. So you've got the bidirectional links that you can create inside the node of the text itself. So in Obsidian, it's the double brackets. But you can also use tags, and with the properties at the note level, I use these a lot. So you could have note level tags on things. You could have the location of the notes in the file explorer. You could have them being manually added to a map of content. There are all these different ways that you can link these ideas together. And I have found personally, I teach this in the Practical PKM cohort, that you have to figure out for yourself what ways you want to use these various methods. And I've kind of landed on this is the way that I use these things because I want to see them in a certain way. So, for example, I will use tags multiple ways. I'll use them at the note level so I can see, for example, all of my sketch notes because I've got not just sermon notes in there. I've also got like notes that I've taken from conferences that I've gone to, Focus Course Live, stuff like that. And I can click that tag and I can see all the notes that have the sketch notes tag, and I can see all of my sketch notes across all the different domains that way. I also have tags for the individual, like daily questions, journal entries, things like that. I can use queries then to pull all that stuff together, and I can see all my journal entries with the notes that they came from. And like you could use tags alone as a way to link things together because you can use them at the note level or on the line level. But I kind of use them specifically those ways, and then I'll group things together by folders, and I'll group things together by maps of content, and I'll group things together by see also links. And I just kind of, if you were to ask me, how do you know when to use which one? It's just, well, whichever one kind of feels right in that specific scenario. I will say, I think this is one of the mistakes that, like, Tiago and Building a Second Brain, like that's really phenomenal stuff that he's put together over many, many years. But when you think about like the PARA method, it's very prescriptive. You have these folders for organizing your information, projects, areas, responsibility, archive, and people will create that structure in whatever app they're using. And I feel that is a little bit forced. The general advice I would give people when it comes to where you're going to draw those lines, it's kind of like, have you heard the story about when people are putting in the paths at the universities?
Yep.
They just let the students walk and then they pave the paths that show up. Like that's what you should do with your PKM system. Your brain is going to naturally go down some paths, create some structure for those paths instead of trying to force your brain down specific predetermined paths.
All right. Do you want to talk about anarchy?
Let's talk about anarchy.
Okay. So
as if this conversation is not enough anarchy.
Yeah. Like this is actually one of the chapters where we don't have to go, I guess, into as much detail on this one as we have in the past. But anarchy is basically saying that, like, don't think of it as we're trying to like destroy or, disrupt or whatever. Think of it as chaos. And then like, how do we create something out of that chaos? How do we embrace that chaos? How do we create something out of that chaos? So this ties back into something that he talks about in the introduction as well, where that zettelkasten is a bottom-up approach to this. Instead of a top-down approach, it's a bottom-up approach. So the chaos of all of these notes, these individual notes at the bottom level of the system, we're going to follow those connections back up to get our trains of thought. And basically, if you allow that to happen, you'll start to see what he calls semiotic chains form, right? These like chains of thinking or these chains of reasoning form back up through. And you can do it through this distributed network. So he talks about this the distributed network, a system where every idea is both an intersection and a point of departure. So you can start anywhere and get to a lot of different places, right? Or you can get to that place through some other place. We started some other place. Talks about this idea of the rhizome, right? A framework for understanding.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, like, so I'll let you unpack that a little bit more, but like, and then he gets into the how do you work with the chaos, and he gets into these hub notes, right? They help point towards various places, and your thinking has gone. So basically, you can think of them as access points. So the hub is like the access points to then go off and go into your chain of reasoning, and then he says structured notes, which basically contain lists of notes pointing towards a train of thought developing. So it's like these are ways to hub notes and structured notes are ways to essentially engage with your chaos and try to make something out of it. And you can start from anywhere, and you can develop these as this thinking comes to your mind. The last one he talks about in this section to try to make sense of the anarchy or make sense of the chaos are these keyword indexes, where you have this idea of like, okay, basically I'm just going to throw out this keyword and I'm going to list all the notes under that keyword. In my mind, this ties into your tags, right? Like, so I would then tag a note, and that's my keyword index. And then I can search for the tag, and it's going to pop up all of those. Obsidian is really, really good at pulling those for me. I don't have to manually go and do all that into one note unless I want to, unless I would want to do that. So that's kind of the high level. I don't know what you have, if you want to talk about rhizomes and other things.
Yeah, so the rhizome theory is that you enter by any point whatsoever, none matters more than another, and you discover what other points the entrance connects to. That's really that's what I'm after with my use of Obsidian. But I also think that you don't have to rigidly approach it the same way. So just defining that rhizome theory, it's almost like, well, you connect everything, and then you enter in at a home note, and then you click on something from the home note, and then you navigate that way. It's sort of like a choose your own adventure book at that point. And you could use it that way. That's cool. But other times I'll go in there and I know exactly what article I want to write, and I just open that note and I start writing. And then as I start writing, I'm like, oh wait, don't I have something about, didn't I write something earlier about this? And I'll find the connections, and I'll make them that way as well. So I think that the structure here is going to evolve and emerge over time. And that's the beauty of it. So one of the important distinctions I got from this section at the very beginning, he says that anarchy is about leveraging chaos, not creating it. The chaos is there. You're not trying to make a mess. It is going to naturally be a little bit messy. And what you want is to provide enough structure to gain from that mess something of value. And that is going to tie to the whole idea of tools for thought, which is really what I think PKM is, or at least it should be, is these are things that are going to allow us to do more with the information that is already coming into our world. Now, I teach a couple different levels of knowledge in the Practical PKM cohort. The first level is the information, where you just dump it somewhere and you can search and find it later when you want to recall it. The second level is knowledge. You know where that thing is, but it doesn't really affect you day to day. And then the third level is the application, where you're actually doing something with that information. So any of the productivity books that you read, that's what you want from it. If you're going to read a book on habits, you want it to help you create better habits and eliminate bad habits. There's got to be some sort of tangible takeaway that affects you day to day. So that's what we're after with this. But then, the hub notes, which this is where I mentioned in my mind map file, this is like the map of content. The structure notes, which are notes that contain lists of notes in semantic order pointed towards trains of thought being developed. The keyword index, which is the prescriptive way to enter the zettelkasten, but it's not exhaustive. These are all different tools that you can use. And this is where zettelkasten starts to fall down for me, because it seems like it's very clear. This is what you do. These are the pieces that you need. And then the alphanumeric IDs, this is an important part of this, because well, let me back up a little bit. Those were actually a necessity for the paper-based zettelkasten, and that it makes sense where those came from. But I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that they're necessary maybe with the digital tools that we have, because we have so many other ways that we can connect things. Now, as I'm thinking about those alphanumeric codes, those are like 2.1b2, right? So the thing with these is that they're not supposed to be an outline. They don't indicate semantic quality of notes, but just by making these connections, you are kind of sort of making a structure here. There is a little bit of a hierarchy. 2 means something, point 1 means that it's below that, B means that it's below the point 1, 2 means that it's below the B, right? So there is a structure that is emerging through these. Now, I like the thing that he calls out, and this is one of the friction points I had with zettelkasten initially, was that you don't want to have to make the things that are at the same hierarchical level there in order of priority or importance. You want to disconnect from that. So that's where the anarchy piece, the non-hierarchical organization, leads to non-normative ideation. That's really what we're after. But then I kind of think when it comes to adding enough structure to your chaos for you to do something with it, you got to figure that out for yourself. And kind of the place I'm at is like when it comes to the individual numbers, who really cares?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe, I'm getting value out of my notes and ideas already. So mission accomplished. But for someone who's coming to this new and they want to get more out of their notes and ideas, maybe there is a lot of value in doing that. I don't know. But for me, as I'm reading it right now, that's kind of where I draw the line.
Okay.
All right. Should we talk about writing with your zettelkasten?
Let's do it.
Okay. So this is the last part, and I think this one is going to go more quickly. This is the one I think where he gets into the specifics of how he writes, and there's some interesting tidbits in here, but this is probably the least prescriptive part of the whole thing. So chapter 7 is what to write about and how not to do it. Chapter 8 is writing for readers. And then chapter 9 is managing your writing projects. So the first one here, what to write about and how not to do it. This is really just looking at the clusters of ideas in your zettelkasten and using those as inspiration for what to write about. Reference notes can show you what's been capturing your attention. Structure notes can provide a foundation for writing. Main notes can nudge you toward a composition. I think all of that is true, but then there's one thing that he says here that trumps all of it, I think, and that is always take advantage of inspiration.
Yep.
So everything about zettelkasten is great, but if you were to take all of this away, I think you can still be inspired and still write about things. Because when I came to creativity, I thought, and I said that I guess I'm just not creative, and Steal Like an Artist was the book that made me realize, oh, creativity is a formula. When you make something new, you're just connecting dots in ways that haven't been done before. Well, if I just focus on getting better dots, then probably I'm going to get better output. That's exactly what happened before I understood any of this stuff. So if you just improve the quality of your input, you will improve the quality of your output. Now, everything that he talks about here could actually exponentially increase that, I would argue. But for me, what it comes down to is collect high quality dots and then write when you're inspired.
Yeah.
And when you do that enough, you get some traction, you're inspired more often.
Well, and I see this going both ways, right? Because I was, as I'm thinking about this, there's this bottom-up approach where we look for these long connections and then we say, well, what is the long connection and how do I turn that into some sort of a writing? But then there's also, like you said, inspiration. And I think that's the benefit of it, or the beauty of zettelkasten, is it can work both ways, because really at the raw level, you're taking ideas, you're going to call them dots, right? And you're connecting those dots. It doesn't matter how I enter into that web, as long as I get into that web, something should come out of it. Now, whether it's good or not, that's a whole nother story, but like something should come out of that. If I've done this well and there's something there, I can connect these dots in a way that can tell whatever length of story, I would want to, whether it's he talks about posts for social media, he talks about blogs, he talks about articles, and he talks about longer form, different type of books. And that really resonated with me in terms of, I think this type of a system, or this type of a framework, foundation, I don't know what word you want to call it, could lead to all of those different types of writing. Like there's definitely validity there in what he's saying.
Yes. And so this is getting at one other thing that we need to call out here. So your writing can manifest a lot of different ways. And ultimately what you're after, though, is the quality, not the quantity.
Mm-hmm.
You want both, and quantity leads to quality most of the time. But he calls out something that I really appreciated here. Nicholas Luhmann is praised for his productivity, not the quality of his writing.
Yep. Is this what you wanted to talk about before?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay,
so if you follow this whole format, you have all these connections, and maybe that means that you have a bunch of words that you can spew out whenever you need to. But the inspiration piece, you'll never write anything that's any good unless you are inspired, I think. So I want more than just a machine that's going to crank out words. I mean, ChatGPT can do that.
Yep.
That's not what I'm after. And he calls out somebody specifically. I'm not sure if we should mention it. There's another book. Do you remember?
I don't even remember. No, I don't remember. No.
Okay.
No.
Well, I'll mention it. Bob wrote it. So it's the Anti-Net Zettelkasten by Scott Schweiger. I have that book. It's a giant book. It's like 600 or 700 pages, if I'm thinking right about it. And he mentions that system, you can use that to write lots of words, but there's, Bob's words, more to writing than just spewing words. So I really appreciate this whole section. It's kind of like, okay, so you have this zettelkasten, which is going to prime the pump, but then that's really when the work begins, because writing is hard. And you have to not just have a bunch of words that you can say, you have to distill it down into a way that's communicating these ideas well. Now that gets into the whole chapter 8, writing for readers, where something you hit on, this writing could take multiple formats. And this also reminded me of kind of like Ship 30 for 30, because I went through that cohort. And you write to kind of refine your ideas. And what they talk about in that, because it's all really about writing and publishing every day for 30 days. Using the social platforms as a way to validate ideas. That's something that's really interesting to me. And I know that this is a missing piece for me currently. I write the newsletter every week. That's roughly 1,500, 2,000 words by the time I'm done. And I really put a lot of work into that, and I hope that it's awesome. But then, I have trouble sharing the same sort of stuff on social media. And kind of the ideal process, I think, for me is when I get excited about something, I'll start by running it through the process in Obsidian, or the zettelkasten Lite, whatever you want to call my thing. And as I start to clarify my thoughts on it, then I'm kind of writing the draft version of that publicly. And then I'm collecting feedback from people there. And then that ultimately translates into, well, this model doesn't really work for people. They didn't really like the framing of this argument. These ideas were, the labels for these are maybe a little bit clumsy, but I'll believe that can translate into better versions in the future. So I want to add that to my creative process. I don't know when I'm going to be able to do that. Probably after the Life HQ launch, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Yep.
But I think that's an important piece that's been missing for me, is the social media as the co-creative environment, and then the long form writing that can be either top down or bottom up, but that's kind of the distillation of some tried and tested ideas that will appear other places. And I think adding that testing stage is going to ultimately increase the quality of the end product as well.
Yeah, I liked his section about creating in community, like writing is created in community, and how he ties back into taking the feedback that others give you and then reincorporating it back into your writing. Now, the thing that the pessimist in me, right? Or the thing that, I come in and I go, well, this works great if you have an engaged community. But if you don't have anybody, right? If you don't have any engaged community, the first thing you got to do is you got to just start trying to get a community. So, for somebody like me, I mean, I don't have a significant community that cares about the thoughts I put out on the internet. So step one, start writing
Yeah.
to then get people into the community, to then hopefully get them to engage with the work that you're doing in the community. And then you can then do the cycle that he repeats. So it's not that he I don't think he did it intentionally where it was just one of those blind spots that you don't have anymore because you've got this community developed. And it's oh, by the way, if you don't have a community, just start writing a bunch of stuff and try to get a community. And then you can take those comments and feed them back into your writing. But I agree that, writing is better, or that meaning is created in community. I think that's a really, really strong premise. The more feedback we can get and the more people we can get to speak into the ideas and the thoughts we have, I think the ideas just get better and better.
Yeah, agreed. Now, the rest of this is kind of Bob's system for writing, and I think there's some basic task management advice here, which maybe is helpful for people who want to write. One of the things that he talks about is 2 different kinds of writings, writing with a deadline, writing without a deadline. Seems simple. Everybody understands the difference here, but I can tell you they are very different things, and you won't know that until you are writing for a deadline.
Yep.
I would prefer not to have a deadline whenever possible, but I use them tactically when necessary, just so I can keep up with the cadence. Like the newsletter has a deadline of every Monday morning, and it's hard at first, but then once you get into a rhythm, that deadline becomes less scary.
Yeah.
A couple other nuggets from here. He talks about using due dates, but not due dates. So do as in I'm going to do the thing, D-O, not this is the date that it is due.
Had you heard of this before?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've called it do and do because it's easy to confuse. Yeah. Makes sense when you're writing and people can actually see the words. But if you're just describing it like we are on a podcast, that is a little confusing. So I would say start dates or scheduled dates instead, which are different. But all of them are supported with the Obsidian Task plugin, by the way. So all of my task management stuff is built on this. I use all 3 of these kinds of dates. Do is when it actually needs to be done. Start is this is the date that it is able to start working on it. It's not available before this. And then scheduled is this is the day that I intend to do this thing. I don't typically use the scheduled dates. The way I schedule things is I have the list of things that I'm going to work on, and then I look at my list, and then I translate that to the time block plan, write that on my note card, put it on my desk.
Yeah.
Adding those to the system is a little bit redundant to me, but he also reiterates that there is no one system here, so you got to figure out where to draw all these lines. I think in terms of writing, the general advice here of using the due dates selectively, not overusing them, that's important. And then create enough structure to help you move forward, but not so much that it's a lot to maintain. That's really what you're after. And then he talks about the creative log, which is really just kind of interstitial journaling about what he's was able to do throughout the day. So these are a record of what he did, thoughts about what needs attention, suggestions for what to work on next. That's a cool idea with the creative log, but not going to do anything with that myself.
Yeah, I'm good on this section. I thought it was valuable tips that he gives and different things to think about, but nothing really major here for me.
All right, let's go to the last section then. The last section is the afterword, the triangle of creativity, and we're not going to talk long about this, I promise. I like this idea, though. He's got, again, these loops where you are reading, you're thinking, and then you're writing, and all of those influence one another. So he's got this triangle, and writing is bigger than just writing. I 100% agree. The triangle of creativity is not always a friendly place. People on the internet can be jerks. Also agree. My version of this is the creativity flywheel, but I think we're kind of speaking the same thing. Yeah. You have to be consuming things, and then you have to go through a process where you make sense of those things. And then the last part of that is the actual writing, the distillation of your thoughts on the thing where you write. Yeah. I really don't think there's a way around that. I don't think you can speak it into existence. I think there's something about the actual form of writing. Yes, you can write by dictation. Maybe that works. But for me, there's just something about seeing the words appear on the page. Yeah. I don't think most people write dictation-wise while they're looking at the words appearing on the page. They just kind of see if Siri picked it up when they were done. And I would encourage people not to do it that way. I know David Sparks does it that way, but he's been doing it for many years. If you're just getting started, you need to see the progress that you are making. Writing provides that. So, and then I think regardless of what field you're in, what market, whatever, there is benefit to a writing habit. I think everyone should be trying to develop this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with the triangle more in terms of they feed each other, they support each other. It just makes everything, each one of those increases your ability to do the other one. I think the missed opportunity here. So if I was given Bob feedback on figure 60, I would say like community needs to play into that, right? So he talks about, a larger, much more communal system of creativity where emphasis on interacting with other writers, readers, and global canon of creative works. Like, I think that in that figure, if he would acknowledge community existing in all of those places, right? So maybe it was the background of it, like all of these three things in the triangle exist in a community and they're better if you do them in community. I think that would enhance that figure and that idea. But the premise of it, the triangle, I completely agree with. I liked I don't know if we were going to get there or not, but I liked in the afterword, or it was maybe after the afterword, he has like the lightning round of like, this is what people ask me about all the time, and here are my quick answers. Boop, 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 and he goes down through those. It's like the one I wrote down was, should I bring my old notes into my zettelkasten? Nope, I wouldn't. Like just start fresh, start new. And then the last thing I'll have, and this is more of a general comment that really helped me think through this. So like, and it actually worked really well that I got your Life HQ beta and I got this book, and I read this book at the same time, because like my natural inclination would have been to smush these two things together in the same obsidian vault. And one of the things he says in this book is like, keep tasks, scheduling, planning, keep that separate from idea generation, idea connection, zettelkasten development. So like I'm playing around right now with two different vaults. There's the zettelkasten vault that's just for this work, and then there's the Life HQ beta vault that's just for that kind of work. And I can tell you that at I don't know, a week or so, maybe a little bit less than a week or so, this makes sense. This is it's a much better way to do it than to try to smush these two things together and still keep them organized in the best way that you can keep them organized, or not bleeding over into each other, or kind of, whereas before I would have just tried to do all of this in the same Notion or Obsidian or whatever, note-taking database, and it always got too cumbersome. It just got too like, I just don't know where anything is, and I'm so confused about where I put things. So separate things. So
I do what works for you, but I generally disagree with like the multiple vaults thing, and I'll tell you why. When you are clear on how you're using a tool, the fact that you've got all of these workflows and all of these different things inside there doesn't deter you anymore. It's when you try to just copy paste what other people are doing that you get confused. With my main Obsidian vault, where I keep all of my tasks and I manage all of my writing projects, and I also have all the Bible study stuff and the sermon notes and the book notes and everything else. By having that all together, I'm able to connect things across multiple domains. And that is really important to me. I get a lot of insight with how things connect across different domains. I think we talked about that in the last episode, maybe, or maybe it was the one before that on Hidden Genius, about Leonardo making the connection when he was throwing stones into the water about how sound waves work, right? Yep. That's the kind of thing that you can get when you keep things together. And I think if you use multiple vaults, multiple tools, like that just has more complexity in how you're actually going to interact with those. If you have to switch vaults every time you open up Obsidian on your iOS device, you're not going to use Obsidian very long. I'll tell you that.
I'm curious at how that's going to work when I move to an iOS device.
Yes. Yeah. So it's picking the right tool for the right job, but being clear on what you're actually using those tools for, which is really the whole PKM stack, which is part of the Life HQ. So once you figure out I'm going to use Obsidian for this piece, but I'm actually going to use Todoist for my tasks because I need location-based reminders and Obsidian doesn't give me that, so you change that part. That's cool. But I think there is value of having all these things being able to be connected as well. So I don't agree, but I don't disagree. Like, I understand the general idea. It's okay to have different walled gardens for the different things. But I think I would generally advise against, well, just spin up another vault or use another app, because before long, now you've created a whole bunch of different places when really you only need like 4 or 5 buckets.
Yeah.
You need a task manager, you need a note-taking app. You can identify the tools that you need for your workflow and then which tools or apps you're going to hire for those jobs. But once you're clear on that, it really doesn't matter how many ways you're going to use Obsidian versus whatever. And maybe Obsidian isn't the right thing for you at all. Like that is a very distinct possibility, but you got to kind of have to figure out where you're going to put up the boundaries, because the boundaries are intended to keep the undesirable things out and keep the desirable things in. If you have no idea what's desirable or undesirable, you have no idea where to draw those boundaries.
And I think that's where I'm learning right now, what I want in the space. And the good thing about Obsidian is it's pretty easy to transfer those files into that new vault and have them get piped right in. So
Yep. True. All right. Let's talk about action items. So it's my book. I'll go first. Just grabbing the time code here. I've got 2 of them. One was the ask, what other notes should I connect to this when I am creating a note inside of Obsidian? And I don't know that I'm going to have a whole lot of value derived from that by the time we record next, but I think long-term, this is really going to pay off. And then I also want to incorporate into my writing rhythms the writing for social media. I have the tools in place to do this. It's just one additional thing that I haven't made the time to do. Yeah. I'm already writing for the newsletter. I could very easily break this into regular posts using the Hype Fury is the app I use for scheduling. But that I can post to Threads, I can post to X or Twitter, I can post to LinkedIn, I can post to Medium. Like, I can post it to all these different places. Why am I not doing this?
Yes. Why are you not doing this?
Yeah. And that's a little bit different than what I had mentioned. So I'm going to create these threads from the newsletter, but I also want to, in addition to, once I start scheduling that, the next layer on top of that, I think, is like the shorter stuff, or what do you think about this? And the polls about things. So that's all part of that as well.
Yeah, I think, so mine, I stated it earlier, but capture and process fleeting notes. I think a more general one that I'll hit before I do that is basically just, keep playing around with zettelkasten. So I don't know what that means. It could mean, I just take my random thoughts and do the fleeting notes and do the, process those, or it could mean I try to make more main notes. I want to just keep playing around with this zettelkasten and see if I like it. I can tell you right now that I don't like the IDs. I don't like the numbering of the cards. So it's like, will that stick around or will that go away? It's tough because it's like I'm playing around with Obsidian, Life HQ, zettelkasten. It's like, it's good because I'm learning a lot and I'm getting exposed to a lot of stuff. But like my brain's like, well, what's gonna stay? Like, what's gonna stay and what's gonna go? And how long will these things last? So I think that's where I'm at right now on the action items.
All right. So style and rating. Man, this is the longest conversation we maybe have ever had on Bookworm about one of the shortest books that we've ever read. If it is not clear already, I really enjoyed this book. And I don't typically like covering books for Bookworm where kind of the spoiler alert has already been shared, like, hey, Mike likes this book. So I was hesitant to pick this one. Really happy with how the episode turned out and the conversation that we had. I think this is hopefully going to help a bunch of people who are curious about personal knowledge management and are zettelkasten curious. how the heck do I rate this book? Well, I think I'm going to give it 5 stars. And I say that with a little bit of surprise in my voice because when you compare this to the other 5-star books that I have picked, like the gold standard that stands out to me is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. You can't really compare a system for writing to Man's Search for Meaning.
Agreed. Yes, agreed.
But if you are interested in the topic of personal knowledge management, you feel like you're not getting as much as you want out of the notes and ideas that you have been collecting, and you feel like the systems that you have established are cumbersome, you're not getting the creative payoff that you've been after, this is the book. Forget about how to take smart notes. Forget about everything else that's out there. Read this one first. And in terms of the style, I mentioned this at the beginning, but one of the things that will make this click for just about everybody are all of the examples that Bob uses. He uses examples of notes that he's taken from his own zettelkasten and shows how these things get tied and linked together. So the way that he does that, it covers a broad range of things, which I think is actually a benefit to the whole topic and the discussion about the zettelkasten. I think everybody should read this. First of all, I think everybody is creative. And if you can identify with that, then you absolutely should pick this up, especially if you are a writer or you recognize how writing can add value to your life, both either personally or professionally. This is a great book that will help you out a lot. And I feel like the payoff that you would get for going through a short book like this is going to be phenomenal. Like in terms of the return on your reading investment, hard to think of a book that would provide more value than this one for someone who recognizes that they maybe want to do their best creative work, but are not doing it currently.
All right, so Mike, I'm going to need your help on what my final rating will be on this. So you'll understand as I unpack it. What you said at the very end is the key for me. If you're a writer, and I don't care what kind of writer you are, right? Whether it's social media, very short form writing, blogs, magazines, books, whatever form of writing you do, even if you write scripts for like YouTube, right? Like, so whatever kind of writer you are, if you are a writer, this is easily a 5-star book for me, right? Like not even a question. It's a 5-star book. I think you're better off for reading it, whether or not you use zettelkasten or you try to do any of this stuff. I think you're better off for just thinking through what he describes in the book and the system and the process. And I think you'll leave with a few nuggets, 1 or 2 nuggets for a very short time investment that will make you a better writer long-term and in the future. So if you're a writer, it's a 5-star. If you're not a writer, I don't know, right? Like I don't think I would rate it 5 stars. Like, so somebody's going to come to me and they're like, should I read A System for Writing by Bob Doto? And I say, are you a writer? And they come to me and they're like, well, I don't really care. No, like I don't really care to really ever write all that much. I'm probably not going to recommend that they read it. It's going to be like, it's a good book. Like I really liked it as somebody who has to think and write and create content and do a lot of this stuff a lot for my day job, and just I get enjoyment out of it. But I probably wouldn't recommend it to them. So therefore I wouldn't want to tell them that's a 5-star book for them. So Mike, what do I do? Right? Like how do I rate this book? Because it's easily 5 stars for writing minded folks. And it's probably like, I don't know, a 3 or a 2 for people who just don't care about writing. Like
That's fair.
Or they don't care about zettelkasten. So it's like, I don't know. I wish there was a way that I could be like, caveat, writers 5, everyone else 2.5. Like it's just an okay,
Split the difference, I guess. I don't really know. I mean, the one thing I would say is that if you are listening to this podcast, you probably care about the type of information that you are already consuming. Maybe you are not creating something with that information yet. And for everybody listening to this, I would say you should be. That's a general statement, but I believe it's 100% true that creating something is an important part of sense making. And doesn't have to be a blog, doesn't have to be a podcast, doesn't have to be a YouTube video, but I think writing will improve your life. And so that is general, but I understand your predicament here.
Okay, that helped me. If I think about the audience for this show and the people who are going to listen to Bookworm and the people who are going to stick with us through 2+ hours of audio on this book, it's a 5-star book. Put a 5, like it's a 5-star book. Yeah, we're rating it a 5.
All right. So we got a golden book.
We got a golden book.
Whew. All right. Let's put a system for writing on the shelf. What's next, Cory?
All right, so my book is next. It is 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna and Mike. Say it because you've done one of her books before. Weist?
I forgot to look it up.
I forgot to look it up too, so I was hoping you were going to say me. I'm going to say it's Weist because it's spelled different than West. But she is the author of The Mountain of You, The Pivot Year. She's got quite a few different books. This one was from 2018 is when it came out. And I just think it's going to be an interesting and challenging book. If you're going to read it with us, it's a longer book. So it's one of the longer ones we've done. It's 448 pages. So kind of gear up for that one. But I think we're going to have a good conversation. One of the challenges I'm going to have is to figure out how to break it down because we are definitely not going to talk about 101 of her essays. So we got to figure out how we're going to do that, which Mike, I'll give you a guide prior to sitting down to record that show. How about you? What's the book after 101 essays?
I realized as we were recording that I forgot to put one down here. So I'm going to pick one which is a little bit older, but I have kind of always wanted to read and then discuss for Bookworm, and that is Storyworthy by Matthew Dix.
Okay.
Storyworthy is one of the books that Ali Abdaal raved about several years ago. And when Ali Abdaal raves about a book, that's usually when it blows up. Like he did that with The Pathless Path by Paul Millard as well. I have read a different Matthew Dix book, and the whole idea of storytelling is kind of his thing. But this is the one that gets held up as his definitive work, and this is the one that I have not read. So, Storyworthy by Matthew Dix.
Sounds good. For the pro show today, we talked about our... Oh my goodness, why am I blanking on that? Our creative work, our early creative works that we did, and
all
how
the
we
stuff
felt
that
about
we're
those.
ashamed of.
Yeah, how we felt about those and what those experiences were like. So if you're interested in that, you can check out the pro feed. You can go to patreon.com/bookwormfm. If you end up signing up, highly recommend you sign up through the website. That way you don't get tacked on with an additional fee.
The Apple tax.
But the benefits are the pro show, so you get extra content, the bonus content there. You get a wallpaper. You can get an ad-free. It's the ad-free feed when we sell an ad on the show. And then we send out the bootleg version of the show, or the show that's directly from Zoom. And you get that very, very early, right? So you get it the day, usually the day after we record. So if you're interested in supporting the show, we'd really appreciate that. It helps with just some of the fees that it takes to keep the podcast up and going. So thanks for those who are interested in that.
Yes. And if you are reading along with us, pick up 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think by Brianna Wiest. And we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.